It's hard to overstate how unprecedented this moment is. Just minutes ago, the International Criminal Court in The Hague issued an arrest warrant for Donald J. Trump, the first time in modern history that an international court has taken such action against a former president of the United States. This is not a symbolic gesture. This is not a political statement. This is a legal instrument with real, immediate consequences. And when Warren Buffett, a man who has spent decades avoiding political commentary, decided to speak publicly about this development, it became clear that something fundamental has shifted, not just for Trump, but for how the world understands American power, accountability, and immunity. This isn't just about one man or one court ruling. It's about whether global rules actually apply to those who believe they are untouchable. What just happened? According to documents released this morning, the ICC concluded a sealed investigation that had been underway for more than a year. Prosecutors alleged that policies enacted during Trump's presidency, specifically related to immigration enforcement, rise to the level of crimes against humanity under international law. The investigation focused on three core areas: systematic family separation at the U.S.-Mexico border, conditions inside migrant detention facilities, and the deliberate use of suffering as a deterrent strategy. ICC prosecutors argue that these policies were not accidental, not isolated, and not bureaucratic mistakes, but centrally directed actions, approved at the highest levels of government. After months of review, a three-judge pretrial chamber determined there were reasonable grounds to believe Trump bears command responsibility for these acts. That finding was enough to authorize an arrest warrant. The warrant does not mean guilt, but it does mean this: any ICC member state is now legally obligated to arrest him if he enters its territory. That includes more than 120 countries. Among them the United Kingdom, Germany, France, Canada, Mexico, and nearly all of Europe. Why this matters immediately. For decades, Trump has operated on a single assumption: that American power shields American leaders from international consequences. Domestically, that logic often worked. Cases could be delayed, institutions could be attacked, supporters could be mobilized. International law doesn't work that way. There is no electorate to persuade, no cable news cycle to dominate, no crowd to intimidate. There are only treaties, obligations, and procedures, and the moment an arrest warrant is issued, it starts doing damage, even if it's never executed. Trump's global business empire depends on mobility, licensing deals, property negotiations, personal appearances, relationship management. According to financial analysts, roughly 40% of Trump Organization revenue has historically depended on international operations. That revenue is now at risk, not because of sanctions, but because Trump himself has become legally radioactive. You can't manage a luxury resort in Scotland if entering the country means arrest. You can't close deals in Europe if a layover could put you in custody. You can't reassure partners when your presence triggers legal exposure. This is how power erodes in the modern world, quietly, contract by contract. Buffett's intervention. Within hours of the warrant becoming public, Warren Buffett released a short but devastating statement. He didn't name Trump. He didn't reference politics. Instead, he said this: when individuals believe they operate above all law, domestic or international, they eventually discover that law has a longer reach than they imagined. Accountability often arrives from directions they did not anticipate. For Buffett, this isn't about ideology. It's about risk. He has spent his entire career avoiding uncertainty, avoiding opaque systems, avoiding legal gray zones. And in his view, this moment confirms a lesson he has watched repeat for decades. Power without legal restraint does not create freedom, it creates vulnerability. The deeper shift. This arrest warrant changes the framework entirely. It introduces a new reality for Trump. He may never be arrested, but he is now restricted. He may never stand trial, but he is now isolated. He may deny legitimacy, but the system does not require his consent. International law does not need everyone to agree. It only needs one country willing to comply. And once that threshold exists, every ally, every bank, every partner starts doing the same calculation. Is this relationship worth the risk? That's how influence disappears, not through confrontation, but through abandonment. And this is why this moment goes far beyond Trump himself. It forces a global question into the open. Are there still people who exist above the law, or was that always an illusion sustained by power? The moment the illusion breaks inside Trump's world, this is the moment everything quietly changes. Not with sirens, not with handcuffs, but with phone calls that stop being returned. Because the ICC warrant doesn't need to be enforced immediately to work. It functions the way gravity does, constantly, whether acknowledged or not. The first response is always silence. Law firms request time to review exposure. Developers cite force majeure-style uncertainty. Banks initiate routine compliance reassessments. No one says we are leaving, they say we are pausing. But in global finance and international business, a pause is often permanent. Trump's remaining international partners now face a decision matrix they cannot ignore. If they continue the relationship, they inherit legal and reputational risk. If they terminate quietly now, they limit damage and move on. If they wait and Trump is detained somewhere, they become collateral. Risk managers do not gamble on loyalty. They eliminate exposure. And that is where this becomes devastating. Why this hits Trump differently. Trump has survived scandals, lawsuits, impeachments, and indictments because all of them were domestic. Domestic systems can be overwhelmed. Domestic courts can be delayed. Domestic politics can be polarized. International law operates on a different axis. There is no appeal to popularity, no jurisdiction shopping, no friendly judge to delay proceedings indefinitely. More importantly, international compliance does not require moral agreement, only legal obligation. A British official does not need to believe Trump is guilty to arrest him. A German airport authority does not need political motivation to detain him. A Canadian border officer does not need instructions from Washington. They only need the warrant. And that reality creates a new kind of confinement. Not prison, but geographic captivity. The business mechanics of isolation Trump's brand was built on physical presence. The handshake, the inspection, the photo, the "I was there" credibility. Luxury branding depends on visibility. Licensing depends on access. Deals depend on trust reinforced face-to-face. Remove the ability to travel freely, and the entire architecture weakens. Developers begin renegotiating fees. Hotels quietly rebrand. Partners activate exit clauses tied to reputational harm or legal incapacity. This is not ideology, it's contract law. According to international business analysts, even a 10–15% perceived probability of arrest is enough to collapse deal pipelines. Trump's probability is now structurally non-zero, and permanently so. That alone is enough. The political trap. Politically, the warrant creates a dilemma no strategist wants to touch. A presidential candidate who cannot visit allied nations. A former president who risks arrest at international summits. A potential commander-in-chief constrained by treaties he publicly rejects. This is not about whether voters care about international law. It's about governability. Foreign policy requires presence. Crises require travel. Diplomacy requires movement. A leader who cannot safely leave their own country without legal risk becomes strategically boxed in, and that forces even loyal allies to ask a dangerous question. Can we build a future around someone whose mobility is legally compromised? Once that question exists, momentum shifts. Buffett's warning, decoded. This is where Buffett's intervention matters most. He is not condemning Trump morally. He is diagnosing a failure of strategy. In Buffett's world, sustainable power comes from predictability, from operating inside systems rather than challenging them, from reducing unknowns, not daring them to strike. Trump's approach, assuming power negates accountability, worked domestically for years. Internationally, it backfired. Buffett has seen this pattern before. Corporate titans who ignored regulators, executives who assumed jurisdictional loopholes protected them, leaders who believed scale equaled immunity. They don't collapse overnight. They shrink. They isolate. They become toxic to associate with. And then one day, they realize the system never needed to defeat them, only to wait. The broader implication: this moment is not really about Trump. It is a stress test for the post-World War II order. For decades, international law has been accused of only restraining the weak, of being symbolic, of lacking teeth when power is involved. This warrant challenges that assumption. Either it will be enforced and international law gains credibility it has never had, or it will fail, and the world will openly accept that some actors are beyond reach. There is no neutral outcome. What happens next will shape how future leaders calculate risk, how governments design policy, how power is exercised in a globalized world. Because from this point forward, one thing is certain: the era where status alone guaranteed immunity has entered its most serious test yet. What happens if Trump defies it? At some point, defiance stops being rhetorical and becomes operational. If Trump chooses to ignore the warrant and travel anyway, the situation shifts from abstract risk to binary outcome. There are no half measures at borders. Airports are jurisdiction. Runways are jurisdiction. Private jets do not bypass treaties. The moment his passport is scanned in an ICC member state, the process becomes automatic. Local authorities are no longer weighing diplomacy. They are executing a legal obligation embedded in domestic law. And this is where Trump's usual playbook collapses. There is no negotiation at that stage, no press conference, no social media leverage. Once detained, the narrative no longer belongs to him. It belongs to procedure. That reality alone is enough to deter almost every rational advisor around him, because even a temporary detention, even hours, would be catastrophic. Markets would react instantly. Partners would terminate contracts within minutes. Political support would fracture under the sheer visual reality of it. In modern power structures, images matter more than verdicts, and an image of detention would end any illusion of immunity permanently. If he stays put instead, the alternative is quieter, but arguably more damaging. Accepting the restrictions means acknowledging them implicitly. It means restructuring a global business into a semi-domestic one. It means abandoning entire markets without ever announcing it. This is where the slow collapse happens. International partners don't wait for confirmation. They move first. They assume the worst-case scenario and plan accordingly. The result is not one dramatic loss, but dozens of small ones. A licensing agreement quietly not renewed, a financing deal that fails to align with compliance priorities, a project postponed indefinitely, a brand removed from a building overnight. Each individual decision looks rational. Collectively, they hollow out the empire. This is how power decays in systems that run on risk management. The donor and strategist problem behind closed doors. Political strategists now face an impossible task. You can spin domestic indictments. You can frame federal cases as partisan. You can rally voters against institutions they already distrust. You cannot spin an international arrest warrant backed by allies, not without losing credibility with donors, diplomats, and moderates. Major donors are not ideological warriors. They are risk calculators. And from their perspective, Trump now carries domestic criminal exposure, civil liability, financial instability, and international legal isolation. That combination is toxic. It doesn't mean support vanishes overnight. It means money stops flowing forward. Campaigns don't die from lack of enthusiasm. They die from lack of cash. Why allies matter more than enemies. Perhaps the most telling development is not condemnation from adversaries, but compliance from allies. When countries hostile to the U.S. criticize Trump, it's dismissed as politics. When Britain, Canada, Germany, France, and the EU quietly reaffirm their obligation to enforce the warrant, something deeper is happening. They are signaling that treaty law overrides personal relationships. That is a line many assumed would never be crossed. And once crossed, it cannot be uncrossed without destroying the credibility of international agreements altogether. No government wants to be the one that proves treaties are optional, the irreversible shift. From this point forward, Trump exists in a different category, not convicted, not imprisoned, but constrained. Constrained in movement, constrained in partnerships, constrained in perception. This is a new kind of accountability, one that doesn't rely on force, but on systems that withdraw cooperation. And systems don't hate, they don't argue, they don't negotiate, they simply stop working with you. That's the part most people misunderstand. The ICC didn't need to win, it only needed to change incentives, and it already has. The final question. What we are witnessing is not the end of a political figure. It is the exposure of a structural truth. In a globalized world, power does not come from dominance alone. It comes from compatibility with systems. When someone positions themselves outside every system, legal, institutional, ethical, they may feel powerful for a time. But eventually, every system responds the same way. It closes its doors. And once enough doors close, even the loudest figure finds themselves speaking into an echo chamber with no exits. This is no longer about Trump's choices alone. It's about whether the modern world still has mechanisms that quietly, methodically, and legally constrain those who believe they are untouchable. And that question, unlike any single warrant, is not going away. Why this moment is different from every crisis before Trump has survived scandals that would have ended any other career: impeachments, indictments, financial judgments, public humiliations. Each time the same dynamic played out: conflict inside the American system resolved, or at least delayed, by American politics. This is different because for the first time the pressure is external. No election can reverse it. No Supreme Court ruling can touch it. No executive order can neutralize it. International law does not respond to American campaign cycles. That's the structural break most people are missing. The myth of just ignore it. There's a popular belief among Trump's most loyal supporters that this can simply be brushed off. That court has no power. The U.S. doesn't recognize it. He'll never be arrested. Each of those statements is technically comforting and strategically irrelevant. The ICC doesn't need American recognition. It operates through member state enforcement, and enforcement doesn't happen because countries hate Trump. It happens because they are legally bound, and breaking that bond would damage their own credibility, treaties, and standing. No prime minister wants to explain why international law applies to everyone except one American politician. That's not loyalty, that's suicide. How isolation actually works: isolation isn't announced, it's not dramatic, it's not shouted, it's implemented quietly through compliance memos and risk committees. A board meets, a lawyer raises a flag, a compliance officer asks one question: what happens if he gets arrested while working with us? Once that question is asked, the answer always leads to the same conclusion: end the relationship. Not because of ideology, because of liability. That's how global systems enforce discipline without ever raising their voice. The psychological fracture. There's another layer here, one that rarely gets discussed. Trump's identity is inseparable from movement. Traveling, appearing, being seen, making deals in person, projecting dominance through presence. The ICC warrant attacks that identity directly. Being confined, or even voluntarily, contradicts everything his persona is built on, and people around him know this. Advisors now face a choice between protecting him from arrest by limiting travel or allowing him to defy restrictions and risk catastrophe. Either option weakens him. That internal tension erodes loyalty faster than any accusation ever could. Why Warren Buffett's reaction matters: Buffett didn't comment because he dislikes Trump. He commented because he recognizes systemic risk. Buffett's worldview is built on one principle: long-term power comes from alignment with rules, not resistance to them. His warning wasn't moral, it was architectural. When someone operates as if rules don't apply, systems eventually respond, not emotionally but mechanically. And mechanical responses are merciless. They don't care about popularity, they don't care about narratives, they don't care about charisma, they only care about exposure, the strategic dead end. At this stage, Trump has no winning move. Defy the warrant, risk arrest and global humiliation. respect the warrant, accept confinement and business erosion, attack the system, accelerate institutional resistance. Ignore the issue. Partners make decisions without him. Every path leads to contraction, not collapse overnight, but irreversible shrinkage. And power, once shrinking, rarely reverses course. The larger implication. This isn't really about Trump anymore. It's about whether global institutions still function as constraints, even on the most powerful actors. If this warrant holds, if allies enforce it, if businesses comply with the risk logic, then a line has been crossed in modern history. International law stops being symbolic. It becomes operational. That terrifies some people, it reassures others, but it undeniably changes the game. Where this goes next, the coming months won't be explosive, they'll be administrative, court filings, compliance decisions, quiet withdrawals, canceled meetings, unexplained delays. This is how modern power struggles end, not with coups, but with access being revoked piece by piece. And when historians look back, they may not mark this moment by the warrant itself, but by the day the world collectively decided that even a former U.S. president is subject to systems larger than himself. That's the real story unfolding now, and it's only just beginning. What enforcement actually looks like. People imagine enforcement as police knocking on a door. That's not how this works. International enforcement begins long before any arrest. Flight plans flagged, diplomatic channels alerted, border systems updated, security services briefed, airport authorities instructed. By the time someone is physically detained, the decision was made weeks earlier in quiet rooms you'll never see. This is why the first real consequence isn't handcuffs. It's denial, denied invitations, denied visas, denied insurance coverage, denied financing, denied access. And once access disappears, influence follows. Why allies won't look the other way. There's a comforting myth that allies will protect him out of loyalty, but alliances are not friendships, they're contracts. Every ICC member state made a choice long ago, treaty obligations over political convenience. If one country breaks that rule for Trump, every other country asks, why should we obey it next time? That's how treaties collapse. So enforcement isn't about Trump. It's about self-preservation of the system. No foreign leader wants to be remembered as the one who proved international law is optional. The business reality: no one can spin. Markets don't debate legitimacy, they price risk. An ICC warrant introduces 4 risks that cannot be insured: arrest risk, asset seizure risk, contract invalidation, reputational contagion. Once those exist, no serious counterparty stays, not because they hate you, because fiduciary duty demands exit. That's why this hurts more than indictments. A domestic indictment is noise. An international warrant is structural poison. The silent reclassification. Here's the most dangerous part, and the least visible. In compliance systems, Trump's name now moves categories, from politically exposed person to international criminal risk. That single shift changes everything. It triggers automatic reviews, automatic freezes, automatic escalations. No human emotion involved, just algorithms, checklists, and legal thresholds. Once that switch flips, it almost never flips back. Why there's no reset button? Trump's past strategy relied on one assumption: time favors defiance. Delay long enough, outlast institutions, win elections, rewrite narratives. That logic fails internationally. Time favors institutions. The longer the warrant exists, more countries reaffirm compliance, more partners exit, more precedents harden. Delay doesn't weaken the case. It normalizes enforcement. The internal collapse dynamic pressure doesn't break leaders. Isolation does. As access narrows, advisors begin protecting themselves. Lawyers start documenting distance. Partners stop returning calls. Friends become cautious, not out of betrayal, out of survival instinct. Power is magnetic until it becomes radioactive. Then everyone steps back. The historical echo: we've seen this pattern before, not in America, but globally. Leaders who believed sovereignty made them untouchable. Business empires built on personal presence, networks dependent on charisma. They didn't fall in one dramatic moment. They faded, restricted, cornered, reduced, until one day the world moved on without them. What this reveals about modern power today isn't enforced by armies. It's enforced by mobility, legitimacy, access, systems that remember. Lose any one of those and survival becomes harder. Lose all four and resistance becomes symbolic. That's the real meaning of this moment. Not punishment, not revenge, constraint. The uncomfortable truth. The ICC didn't end Trump. It placed him inside a cage built of rules, obligations, and interconnected systems. A cage you don't see, but one you can't walk out of. And that's why this moment matters far beyond one man. Because once systems prove they can constrain the powerful, they rarely forget how. The question now isn't whether Trump fights back. He will. The real question is whether the world quietly continues enforcing or blinks. And history suggests systems rarely blink. Compliance decisions, quiet withdrawals, canceled meetings, unexplained delays. This is how modern power struggles end, not with coups, but with access being revoked piece by piece. And when historians look back, they may not mark this moment by the warrant itself, but by the day the world collectively decided that even a former U.S. president is subject to systems larger than himself. That's the real story unfolding now, and it's only just beginning.